In the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, May 17th, 2023, and this week on the Roundup, we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last week. First up, before we get into the questions, I want to say a special shout out to those of you that are watching live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube. Also want to say hello to those that have faithfully listened and downloaded our podcast, our audio-only podcast version of the Roundup over the past 3 or 4 years. It's been a pleasure coming to you in your audio listening pleasure. And for those that are watching live, thank you for making us a part of your international edification each week. So as we do each week, we take the themes and questions that we develop here on the Roundup from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays, 9 a.m. Eastern. If you subscribe via the email version through our website at smieconsulting.org/subscribe, fill in your details there in the subscribe link, and you'll get the email delivered with the top social media and international ed news stories each week that we put in digestible hot takes on the various issues of news stories that we see each week. And then we pick themes from those that come in the form of questions here on Wednesday, where we see those themes developing in some of the news stories, and we kind of clump some of them together to come up with our questions and talk about a little bit more in depth as to how these news stories, these topics, these developments impact what we do in international education. So as I mentioned, we do have the email version of the newsletter you can subscribe to via the website. If you prefer to get your international ed news via LinkedIn, we do have a LinkedIn version as well of the newsletter, which I'll drop the links to in the chat. That has now over 1,000 subscribers in and of itself, so we're really proud to be able to meet some of your international edification needs each week through the delivery of that newsletter. So thanks again for making that newsletter the success that it is today. And last bit of as we do each week, we ask these 3 questions, invite those of you who are watching live to contribute any comments or feedback that you have. But for those who are watching on repeat, you'll obviously be able to get the links to each of these stories that we're covering and questions we're diving into through the newsletter. So it's a good companion piece to what we talk about here on Wednesday mornings, Wednesday afternoons for most of the world in the Eastern and Central, Eastern, and European, African, and Asian nations that catch on to the Roundup. So thanks again for being a part of the journey. First question of the day: how does the new SEVP guidance impact recruitment? Now, this came down on Friday afternoon, as SEVP guidance typically does. Came down actually Thursday, I think, Thursday or Friday, and it was the expected news that we knew in the United States with the ending of the pandemic protocols that have been in place that have impacted everything from border control to international visitors to the United States needing to have in the past a proof of vaccination before they would be allowed in. With all those pandemic era regulations expiring when the government under President Biden had indicated that as of May 12th, that would be the case. The pandemic would officially be over and all regulations impacting movement one way or another would also be over. So that has impacted us in a couple of ways. The end of the pandemic means that regulations that were temporarily put in place back in 2020 that allowed for students to engage in online education who were already enrolled in U.S. programs to continue their degree studies in online courses. That happened for the rest of the 1920 academic year, all of the 2021 academic year, all of the 21-22 academic year, and even into this year, 22-23. So officially, as of the end of this spring semester, the requirements that allowed students to pursue who are already in the United States to pursue online programs due to their status in the country, which normally requires only one or allows only one course per academic term to be online. they have been able to take those online courses or hybrid courses. Now, with the end of the pandemic, the anticipation was that we would revert back to the old regulations, which limit students to one course online per academic term, so no more than 3 credits, and that has meant that university programs, we'd talked about this several times in the past. There was a glimmer of hope that maybe a DHS would move slower than SLUG and catch up with the rest of the world in terms of how education is now being taught and how educational coursework has been delivered. Has been evolving, but that acceleration happened dramatically during the pandemic when forced a lot of institutions to rethink how they deliver coursework and forced a lot of programs to go entirely online. Many are now in hybrid mode as well. So that allows some courses to be part of a course to be done in person, whereas other parts of it may be taken online. So with the return to the one course per term limit, international students that are currently enrolled in fully online programs are in a bit of a pickle. There are some significant decisions that need to be made. And many ISSS offices, if they hadn't already been thinking about doing this, were already kind of gathering information on their current international students and how they were enrolled, what programs they were enrolled, which of those programs were fully online, which were hybrid, which were fully in person, and how those are coded at individual institutions can make a difference in what you need to worry about most significantly. We're doing that kind of review at this moment at UNLV in terms of identifying which students have been in fully enrolled, fully online programs, and how many are taking more than one course per term that we will need to check in with and make sure that they're aware of what next steps need to be for that. For them to stay in status. Obviously, that's what every international student has and must do to achieve the benefits that they want of being in the United States. And that goes back to the heart of why the regulation is only one course per term online, is that students are, as part of their visa status, F1 visa status, are required to be physically present in country. Again, there were some pandemic era exemptions to that allowed them to take courses remotely from home and maintain their status so they don't lose time or potentially opportunities for post-study work opportunity through OPT. But that has expired as well. So physical presence is required as part of their visa status, and until the visa regulations are changed to allow for multiple courses being taken online yet still be physically present in the United States, those students are in a particular position where something's got to give. They got to either universities need to make adjustments to their programs that are offered fully online to allow for a maximum of one course for that program, whether it's an undergrad or a graduate degree, to be taken only one academic course per term, or to shift all of those courses that they would need to take to, in what we've done and how our courses are coded in many institutions like this that have a portion of each class that is allowed to be done online, but then there is a physical requirement for a course for the rest of the course to be in person. So that typically allows the flexibility in how students approach their education in terms of how they take their classes. So that still allows them to stay within status. So what we're faced with now, we're doing an inventory of as part of a larger discussion of what's allowed and not allowed for in-person education for students who were required to be in person to take classes as a part of their immigration status. A lot of the switch to online was a matter of convenience for a lot of programs. Cost-saving measures perhaps were involved in delivery of programs online versus in person. Maybe some of that and easier to replicate, as with the MOOCs in the past, in terms of being able to offer courses to larger groups at once. But there's still some significant challenges in that. We have a online education an educational compliance officer that is, we're going through a review of potential markets for our online programs to be delivered overseas, specifically in certain markets that we have to be aware of what the regulations are in given markets related to tax, related to recognition, related to insurance, and other factors that go into the mix of being able to legally deliver coursework in country. There's infrastructures that need to be set up, tax implications as well. So there's a lot that is riding when your students are paying for something to be delivered in country, and whether it's recognized by their home government and all of these things. So there's a lot that we need to be aware of in the online space in general terms, but as it impacts, and that's one thing when it's delivered exclusively to citizens outside the United States or to international students outside the United States, there are one set of regulations or concerns that each institution should take on board quite seriously, and another set relates to what they can't do when they're in the country, and in the country with that one course per term limit. They are now able to take only one course per academic term again. So what do we do with the rest? So as I mentioned, we're undergoing this institutional review to look at all of our programs that are fully online, and having conversations with deans and program coordinators that if they are reliant on international students for these programs, one of two things will have to happen. They'll either need to shift the delivery to an online only, and that will exclude all current international students that are in country from doing that program. Those students would have to return home if they want to finish that degree. There are also implications for those that want to maintain an in-person presence for their international students. They will have to make significant changes to the course offerings in terms of allowing them to be, or requiring students to be in country and only allowing one course per term, fixing that program to allow that to happen in the sequencing of courses and all of that. There's a lot of challenges in making those changes. So there's quite a bit that international admissions offices and certainly international student scholar service offices need to be aware of and are grappling with as we speak in terms of what happens next. In terms of the recruitment aspect of this, and that's where I wanted to focus a bit of the conversation now as we finish this question, there are some positives in terms of the implications, not directly of this guidance, but in terms of thinking outside the box in terms of delivery of programs. That some, as I mentioned, we're exploring some online options for delivery of our programs in particular markets. We're looking at online English language instruction delivery to students that might already be interested in our programs, but we are aware that they don't have the minimum English proficiency to be admitted to a full degree program, but don't necessarily want to come for a semester or year of living expenses and just to take English. That we're looking at other models that we can potentially deliver the English online. Other programs that have gone fully online, again, might be eager to boost their international enrollments, but to do that, we have to go through a very significant review and process to see if it's viable in the markets that they want to deliver it. So that's potentially changing the nature of how we recruit. On the plus side, for students that are already in the funnel, that if they're coming into programs that are on campus, the revocation of this online courses allowance is something that it's not directly tied to the revocation of that guidance, pandemic era guidance, but it is tied to the revocation of pandemic area restrictions that the U.S. government put in place. One of those was requiring any entrants, non-citizens that were entering the country, to have proof of vaccination status before they would legally be allowed in. So for us, that's something that we change in our messaging out to students in terms of after they get their I-20s, we can take out the requirement that U.S. travel restrictions require you have vaccination status, proof of vaccination for COVID-19 before you're allowed into the country. We can now remove that. It makes one less thing that these international students will need to do in order to enter the country legally. So there's a little bit of a plus side there. That's probably the only plus side that I can think that would apply across the board to everybody, making it a little bit easier for students to enter if they can get their visas and do cross all the other T's and dot all the other I's that they need to before they can come. But that's certainly a plus. It will force a rethink, again, as I mentioned, for international admissions offices in terms of for students that are already in the pipeline for programs that they've been admitted to for the fall. If they've already been issued I-20s, there's a real conversation that needs to happen immediately with programs on campus about delivering their courses to these students, the need for those to be in person, all but one course per term. So that's a larger conversation that needs to happen on campuses, and it does have immediate impacts on how in the admissions process you communicate with students that have already applied to programs they thought they were going to be able to start at your university, whether you told them they were online or not. That's another question entirely, but certainly this could come as a potentially negative implication to them if they all of a sudden find out they've been admitted, got an I-20, about to go for their student visa. This is the time critical point of the season where you need to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row, not just them. You have all your ducks in a row as a university in terms of you're meeting your legal requirements to the students that you're admitting. If a program is only online now, you might not be able to have it on your I-17 as a program for which you can issue an I-20. So there's a lot of hidden potential landmines that can pop up and impact institutions, and so it's a wise to have a larger discussion on campus, not only with your ISSS office, but your international admissions offices. Deans and directors of programs need to be involved in this conversation, and sooner rather than later, because if you let it hang on too long, and with semesters ending, a lot of professors will be leaving, program directors will be leaving, but this is a conversation that needs to happen now. That can't be overlooked. So hopefully those conversations are happening on your campus. So let's move on to our second question. And as we do oftentimes, the overlap between social media and international education can often be, you can pick almost any topic and you can find there's some overlap. This next one is more social media than it is directly international education, but it's a question that I want to get on your radar as international admissions folks in particular, those that are going out recruiting. Some of you may already be using TikTok as part of your international recruitment strategies, but there's always good to keep your ear to the ground as to what's coming next. And part of the question is what comes after TikTok refers to obviously the kind of the dodgy political future of TikTok in the United States, as well as many Western nations that have bans placed on government employees using TikTok as kind of the minimum ban that we've seen, all the way up to what India's done as completely banning TikTok from app stores and anywhere in the country from its use happening for access to it for any of its citizens. So that is that there are hesitations. There are almost half the states in the United States have now banned their state employees from using TikTok for business. There are, in some states, there are less stringent restrictions, but there's, for example, in Nevada, the state has said unless it's for a primary part of your job to use this tool as part of your job function. And for UNLV, we have both an admissions TikTok and campus-wide TikTok, and we have teams for each of those that's their jobs on campus to do this, to use TikTok. Whether that changes if there's a nationwide ban on TikTok, then obviously that would impact us, even though our state says use it. You can't use it unless it's for business purposes on government devices, state-owned devices, that type of thing. So we're in a position of looking at next options here as well. What is that next big thing coming down the pipe? Ironically, with a lot of the talk politically on what's happening with TikTok and how it may impact ability for users, particularly influencers, to use that platform for their businesses, you are now seeing, ironically, ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, a Chinese company, ByteDance, is now using or has now developed a new platform called Lemon 8. Lemon, the word lemon with the number 8, lemonade type of thing. So that is their next big thing, and many influencers who are on TikTok, who are kind of putting their thumb in the air and seeing which way the winds are blowing politically, are also migrating or duplicating what they're doing on TikTok on their on this new platform, Lemon 8. So we'll see if that is the next big thing. That it's nowhere near the user base that there already exists, for example, in the United States. But that's one thing that ByteDance, again, and one article I read this week that is actually the basis of this question, kind of compares what's happening with these other platforms because it's a ByteDance company that's created this Lemon 8 platform. They're comparing it to kind of whack-a-mole from in terms of what governments are now having to do. Well, who owns this company? Oh, it's the same one that produced TikTok, so we probably should ban them as well, because it's the same kind of issues that would apply to data security and with TikTok would also apply to Lemonade, same parent company. No reason to expect that to be any different, because it's ByteDance's parent company is wholly owned in China, is bound by Chinese state regulations in terms of sharing data upon request of any of its users. So the likelihood is that this would be a conversation we'll keep hearing as long as it's a company that's directly connected to China, as ByteDance is. So we'll see what happens next. So it's a quick one, but one that I certainly wanted to get into the conversation this week, that start thinking about what comes after TikTok and what you want to get yourself into and what you don't. It's easy enough to replicate content on across different platforms, and most people who post on TikTok are already using those same videos on Reels, on Instagram or Facebook, but also and potentially YouTube Shorts. It's very similar platform, similar styles and formats and that type of thing. Minor differences, but easy to replicate that content across. So not necessarily redoing your entire content strategy, but redoing potentially minor tweaks here and there, depending on what the new platforms require. But certainly good to start thinking about what the future might look like post TikTok. And the final question of the day: will government reforms in the UK and Australia that are pending hurt international education efforts in those countries? We've been talking about the battle that's been going on in the Sunak government in the UK for a number of months now, with the split that has appeared within the party, Conservative Party in the UK, between the Home Office under Suella Braverman and the Education Secretary, the International Education Champion, having very different views on the issue of net migration. And the net migration factor here is what is driving a lot of the potential damage. The Prime Minister himself, Rishi Sunak, had used language that in his early days of his prime ministership had used language that was seen as potentially damaging to international education efforts, when he said that we shouldn't be allowing any international student in that comes in for low quality degrees or going to institutions that are not quality, that do not offer quality programs. So that was kind of a signal that maybe that was where the wind was blowing in the UK. And the issue primarily has centered around net migration numbers, which were off the charts, 30-40% growth in the last year or two, where that has boiled down to what in the UK they call net migration of, they have international students lumped in with net migration, when the reality is most of them don't stay. And that what has happened is that many of the huge growth that the UK has seen in recent years, certainly even during the pandemic, has been for their one-year master's degree programs, which are seen as more attractive, less time, less cost, even though they're expensive. It's less cost because it's 1 year instead of 2 years, as it would be in the US or most other countries. They've succeeded in attracting quite a large number of new international students in the last couple of years that coming specifically for these one-year programs. But they're also, these same students, the reason we've had this spike in net migration numbers in the UK has been because they're bringing their family with them, spouses and dependents. So what that has done is it's caused this rise, because international students are counted into net migration numbers. Their dependents and their spouses are as well. So as those numbers go up, the alarm bells start going off politically. It's like, oh, we've got too many immigrants coming in that we can't handle. They're trying to control their net migration numbers because they're an island. There's limited opportunities for them to come in and stay. The impact on social services, all of these things are the excuses that are usually made when limits are put on the migrants that come in. So reality is the government seems to be very close to making those limits on prohibiting, not just limiting, but prohibiting international students coming for one-year master's programs because they're only in the country for 1 year. Though they have the ability to work after they're done through the graduate work route, the graduate route, they don't want their dependents and spouses coming with them. So that is going to turn off potentially. There's a 30 to 40% increase in net migration numbers because of the rise of the number of international students coming for the one-year master's programs. I don't know the exact numbers that is, but again, it's a signaling thing too. We felt that in the U.S. when President Trump in 2017, right after he took office, imposed what were called the Muslim travel bans to 7 countries. That was seen as a demonstration of a country's perspectives on not just those 7 countries, but on anything international. Not just anything Muslim, but anybody international that might be looking to come. Anybody who's not a citizen that got lumped in terms of how that move by the government impacted prospective students and parents' views of our country, that we were seen as less welcoming. Where there were restrictions in place, it was going to be harder to get in as an international student. Even though you might not be from one of those 7 countries, it was going to be seen as harder and less welcoming. So this might have a similar impact, even though it's targeting one-year master's degree students, which are, though a growing and larger part of the total international students that are in the UK. They represent a government making a decision that, hey, you can come, but your family can't, which for some families isn't possible to make that decision to cut ties. The spouse that is coming to work or to study may need to have their spouse and children with them for whatever reason, and that now, if this happens, will no longer be possible. So it's an impact directly on students that might have been planning to come this fall that may no longer be able to because of this this government decision that is pending that could prohibit their spouses and dependents from coming. Then it has that knock-on effect, as I said, of saying this is a British government decision to eliminate certain groups of people from entering into the United States, into the United Kingdom. So that is seen as a potential significant roadblock to future growth in the UK. So it's as I said back in 2009 when Theresa May's government eliminated the post-study work visa. That was seen as kind of 2 steps back for the country in terms of repairing its in terms of its reputation abroad, that it was no longer welcoming for students who wanted to stay and work. And that impacted growth for quite a bit. It was much more minimal than they perhaps had hoped. But when the previous government came in and reinstated the 2-year post-study work visa, that really was a good sign to the rest of the world that, hey, UK is open for business again. So this sign, if it happens by prohibiting spouses and dependents of students coming from one-year master's programs, could be a very significant challenge to that. So that's what's happening in the UK. In Australia, you've been seeing stories that we've been sharing regularly here on the Roundup and in the newsletter, where in Australia they made the decision early on or during the pandemic to allow students to work more than the 40 hours every 2 weeks that the traditional immigration regulations allow. That restriction lifting during the pandemic has caused a lot of what they call the two-stage migrants that come for education, but long-term goal is they want to stay, and they really don't work is just, or the study part is just ancillary to why they're really in the country to begin with, and that's to become workers and eventually permanent residents. So that's led to calls for a lot of abuse in the system. That's led to, obviously, students coming in that are also putting strains on housing stock that was already limited and during the pandemic got even smaller. So it's kind of caused a lot of ancillary or knock-on effects, so to speak, of them coming in. So the review of a recent government panel has suggested a number of reforms to the current migration system that would put back in place the restrictions on work, amount of work that could be done back to the 40 hours per 2 weeks. And that's work off campus that students in the UK and Australia, most of major destinations have in place for international students. Obviously, we don't allow that traditionally for international students in the U.S. To work off campus unless it's part of their practical training time. They have to be on campus for work opportunities for them to have any work opportunity or a chance to work while they're here before they graduate, or unless it's a curricular practical training time. So what the impact is going to be seen, and we've had some commentators from Australian universities organizations say that the Australia's migrant system is a Ponzi scheme, that it's not fit for purpose, that it fails to attract the most highly skilled migrants and fails to enable businesses to efficiently access workers. And there's the evidence of exploitation that we've talked about, risk of an emerging permanent temporary underclass that have just come for these work opportunities via a study option, usually through a vocational option. So the restrictions are probably going to hit hardest on the vocational sector, which obviously universities have higher academic standards than the vocational sector, which is just coming to get some skills to be able to do a job. So we'll see whether that happens. But certainly the impact in the short term is that it's going to be seen as restrictions on migration are going to be seen negatively in the wider world and could potentially have negative implications for Australian universities. So two of the major destinations right now are facing these kinds of questions, and it may have an impact on positively for us if we don't make too many more restrictions for incoming students. Then maybe that'll happen. But we'll see what moves the needle really in this country if what's happening in the UK and Australia impacts future student flows to the US. Maybe upticks in graduate students that might have been going to the UK may consider us in the US now. Maybe not. Who knows? But may force them to look at other destinations. So we'll see what happens with that. But a lot to keep our ears and eyes around, and we'll talk more about these topics in the coming weeks. So until next time, we wish you the very best and have a great day.